As of today, unemployment is on the rise, sparking concerns about a potential crash in real estate in our current economy. A crash that everyone has an opinion on, including me. Regardless of the opinions, the historical backdrop of the 2008 recession, Great Recession, reminds us that extreme unemployment levels compounded by the financial sector collapses and inflationary pressures from the Federal Reserve's actions played a part in triggering the massive foreclosures and plummeting home prices. This period left a lasting impact on many Americans, irrespective of their direct involvement in housing. Reflecting on these historical lessons, which is the point of this video, is crucial to assess our current situation. For example, where does our current unemployment stand today? How do the conditions compare to those of 2008? And critically, what role does the federal funds rate play in all of this? Welcome to the Big Elephant, where we're going to go ahead and tackle unemployment and its relationship to our current housing markets. In order to understand the direction unemployment may go, let's first take a look at the historical trends before, during, and after the Great Recession, especially pertaining to the federal funds rate, the housing collapse, and subsequent bank insolvency that occurred. First, I want to touch base on how the federal funds rate places strain on employment, for this will be an integral part of the conversation down the line in this video. It's a simple yet complex answer. The federal funds rate places strain on business investment through the impact on borrowing costs. When the Federal Reserve raises the federal funds rate, it becomes more expensive for businesses to borrow money from banks through debt markets. This directly increases the cost of financial expansion projects, investments in new equipment, or other capital expenditures. Because of such, higher borrowing costs mean that businesses may either postpone or scale back their investment plans or employment itself. Higher interest rates can also affect how businesses perceive the risk associated with borrowing. For example, projects that were previously determined profitable and feasible under low interest rates may no longer be attractive under higher interest rates. This can result in cautious approaches by businesses, resulting in fewer investments and slower economic growth. Again, and as a result, when businesses invest less in new equipment, technologies, and expansion, it limits productivity gains and potential job creation opportunities. As fewer investments in new projects or expansions occur, it means that businesses may not be able to hire additional workers. Or it may even mean job cuts if they are scaling back operations due to economic uncertainties caused by higher borrowing costs. So, now that we understand that, what occurred prior to the Great Recession to make the Fed jump in and add to the unemployment issues that were created in 2008? Well, as you probably already guessed, inflation was on the rise. So the use of the broadsword of the federal funds rate had to happen. But why was inflation on the rise? Well, in the early to mid-2000s, inflation in the US exhibited varying trends influenced by factors such as economic growth and commodity prices. Inflation rates started off during the early to mid-2000s were relatively moderate and stable, generally within the Federal Reserve's target range of around 1% to 2%. From the mid-2000s and forward, though, however, leading up to the financial crisis, there was a notable increase in the commodity prices, particularly of oil and food costs. Does that ring a bell? Hold that thought. These price increases contributed to the overall higher inflationary pressures in the economy. But that was not all. At the same time, the housing market experienced a significant boom, driven by easy access to credit, low mortgage rates, and increasing demand for housing, leading to rising home prices and contributing to inflationary pressures in the broader economy. Also, ring a bell? In response to the increasing inflationary pressures and concerns about overheating in the housing market, the Federal Reserve under Chairman Alan Greenspan began gradually increasing the interest rates, or the federal funds rate, from 2004 to 2006. To be exact, in June of 2004, the FOMC increased the federal funds rate from 1% to 1.25%. May through August of 2006, the Federal Reserve continued to raise rates gradually with incremental increases at several meetings. And by June of 2006, the federal funds rate reached 5.25%. Again, sound familiar? Continue to hold on to these thoughts. The level in the federal funds rate marked the peak before the Federal Reserve started cutting rates in response to the impending financial crisis. The goal, much like today, was to prevent inflation from accelerating too rapidly and to maintain price stability. When inflation reached its peak around mid-2008, driven by all of the above, the Consumer Price Index measures showed inflation rates exceeding 4% annually. And then we all know what happened from there, especially if you lived through it, with housing being the catalyst and sparking it all off. Subprime lending being the culprit in particular. Subprime loan defaults resulted in the national mortgage and financial crisis when the MBS markets went belly up. And as people's subprime mortgages defaulted, all of that speculative buying, lax lending standards, and easy access to credit fueled the housing bubble, which finally popped. Wow! But you may be asking, how did subprime mortgages create all of this? Subprime mortgages were offered to borrowers with lower credit scores and insufficient income documentation. These generally came with an adjustable interest rate that could be increased significantly over time. In a nutshell, homeowners got over their heads and quickly. And when ARM loans adjusted, most Americans couldn't keep their heads above water, or they were underwater from the get-go. And why hold on to a sinking ship when you can just allow the home to default? Fueling the fire, banks and financial institutions also bundled these subprime mortgages into complex financial products known as mortgage-backed securities, also known as MBS. These securities were then sold to investors, spreading the risk of default across the financial system. And as the quality of these underlying mortgages deteriorated due to subprime lending, the value of MBS declined sharply. Compounding the issue, credit rating agencies fraudulently assigned high ratings to many MBS investments, leading investors to believe that these securities were safe investments. And when the underlying mortgages began to default in large numbers, it became clear that the ratings were overly optimistic, causing a crisis of confidence in the financial markets. Many of the banks and financial institutions in America had significant investments in MBS and relative derivatives. As the value of these assets plummeted, financial institutions faced losses and liquidity problems, leading to a credit crunch where banks were unwilling or unable to lend to each other, to businesses, and to consumers. The level of the federal funds rate also did not help this process. And when it all came together in a perfect storm, it didn't take long for employment in the U.S. to go down with it. What a mess. Housing-wise, inventory in the market surged as foreclosures increased dramatically, led by mortgage defaults. And thus, due to a massive increase in inventory, home prices declined or crashed. The depressed housing prices also created a further negative feedback loop where declining home values led to more defaults and foreclosures. In the end, the collapse of the housing market had a profound ripple effect throughout the economy by weakening consumer confidence overall, reducing household wealth due to declining home values, and triggered job losses in sectors related to housing and construction. Ouch! When the real estate markets and financial sectors initially fell out, though, only 25 bank failures occurred. This was just in 2008 itself. But of course, it didn't stop there. From the beginning of 2008 through the end of 2013, which includes the aftermath of the Great Recession, a total of 465 FDIC-insured banks failed in the United States. And again, with the failure of the financial institutions, so went employment for Americans. This happened in several ways. For one, as banks failed or merged due to financial distress, they often implemented layoffs to reduce costs and streamline operations. Job losses in the financial sector were substantial, affecting not only banks but other financial institutions such as investment firms and insurance companies. The financial sector also supported a wide range of ancillary industries, including legal services, accounting, consulting, and even real estate. And as we know, the bank failures also contributed to a severe credit crunch. Again, because of such, businesses found it increasingly difficult to obtain financing for operations, expansion, and capital investments. Reduced access to credit constrained business activities, which led to slower hiring and even job cuts in sectors dependent on financing. As people lost their jobs, consumer spending naturally declined, impacting business and leading to job losses in the retail sector. State and local governments also felt the impact of bank failures. Budget shortfalls due to declining tax revenues and increased demand for social services forced many governments to implement austerity measures, including layoffs and hiring freezes. Overall, the cumulative effect of bank failures, financial instability, and the ensuing economic downturn led to a contraction in economic activity, and the reduced economic growth translated into fewer job opportunities across multiple sectors of the economy. Again, no bueno. The fallout resulted in an unemployment rate soaring from a low of around 4.7 in 2007 to a peak of 10% in October of 2009. And that was not it. Many individuals experienced prolonged periods of unemployment during and after the recession, with the duration of unemployment spells increasing and some workers finding it difficult to re-enter the workforce even after the economy began to recover. So I'm sure you're asking yourself by now, Mike, what did the federal funds rate have to do with unemployment during the Great Recession, if housing and the financial sectors were the main culprit? Well, you would be right. What did they have to do with unemployment? While the federal funds rate itself did not directly cause the bubble or the financial crisis, its role in influencing broader economic conditions did. This included credit availability, borrowing costs, and investor behavior. This all led to the buildup of financial imbalances that eventually led to the severe economic downturn. In other words, the level of the federal funds rate made it difficult for businesses to obtain the capital they needed. Remember everything I mentioned above? And the Fed knew it. When the Great Recession occurred, the Fed financially scrambled to lower the federal funds rate. For example, by early 2007, the federal funds rate was around 5.25%. By mid-2007, and in response to emerging signs of financial stress related to the housing market, the Federal Reserve began lowering the federal funds rate. By September 18th of 2007, the rate was reduced to 4.75%. In 2008, as the financial crisis intensified, the Federal Reserve continued to cut the federal funds rate aggressively to stimulate the economy and stabilize the financial markets. To be specific, in January of 2008, it lowered to 4.25%. March 2008, 3%. October 2008, 1.5%. And then in December 2008, 0.25%. Yet, despite the best efforts in the post-Great Recession and subsequent years, the federal funds rate remained at near zero to support economic recovery, but it took years for it to recover. Which leads us to today. So now that we have a historical basis pertaining to what can be in store, what are the similarities between now and then? What are some of the things that are not so similar? Let's touch upon the similar first. One of the most obvious is the notable increases in commodity prices, particularly oil and food prices. Gas prices took off when the current administration killed the Keystone Pipeline and placed temporary moratoriums on new oil and gas leases on federal lands and waters, pending a comprehensive review. According to the data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. crude oil production averaged approximately 11.3 million barrels per day in January of 2021, just before Biden took office. By June of 2021, U.S. crude oil production had decreased to around 10.6 million barrels per day. Mainstream media enjoyed blaming the decline attributed to the lingering effects of reduced drilling activity and production cuts implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, while I'll concede that the pandemic did play a part, the administration's actions in the temporary moratorium of new oil and gas leases restricted domestic energy production and subsequently increased reliance on foreign oil as domestic production became constrained. But the Biden administration's priority of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions also led to policies aimed at transitioning away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy sources like wind, solar, and electric vehicles. These policies also reduced American energy independence by limiting the development of domestic oil and gas resources. Based on a supply and demand concept, if an alternative form of energy isn't ready yet, affordable, or even effective, and one subsequently pulls a plug on what's working, when so many Americans rely on what they currently have, what do you expect? As a result of the energy disaster the Biden administration implemented within the first few days of office, food prices and overall inflation went with it. The higher gasoline prices increased transportation costs for shipping food, and this led to increased costs, which was subsequently passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for groceries. And if that wasn't enough, agriculture heavily relies on fuel for machinery, irrigation, and transportation of inputs like fertilizers and pesticides. When the fuel prices rose, so did production costs for farmers. These increased costs influenced the prices of agricultural products, thus impacted food prices. But that wasn't it. This also impacted consumer behavior as gasoline prices increased. consumers had to adjust their spending habits. The higher fuel costs reduced discretionary income available for other purchases, including food. This change in consumer behavior helped influence the overall demand and prices in the food market. This didn't stop with food, however. Other commodities rose due to the increase in transportation costs as well. And as a more perfect storm couldn't exist, then came the lockdowns. When COVID-19 lockdowns were initiated, it caused widespread disruptions in global supply chains. Lockdowns, restrictions on movement, and closures of factories and ports led to shortages of goods and raw materials. This imbalance between supply and demand pushed prices higher as consumers competed for limited available products. So now comes the question, what would happen to employment if the Fed held the federal funds rate too long? As we know from history, businesses may postpone or cancel expansion projects, investments in new equipment, or hiring new employees due to higher borrowing costs. This reduction in investment and economic activity can lead to slower economic growth and fewer job opportunities. In other words, persistently high interest rates can contribute to an economic slowdown or recession. The slower economic growth can result in businesses laying off workers or implementing hiring freezes to cut costs and adapt to reduced demand. And industries sensitive to interest rates, such as housing and construction, could experience particularly significant declines in employment. Knowing all of this, what are the current trends in employment actually looking like? Let's start off with tech jobs, since they always seem to be talked about the heaviest in the media. Before the pandemic, unemployment rates for tech-related occupations typically ranged around the national average of 3.5%. In mid-2022, the unemployment rate in the tech sector was approximately 2.8%. Recent reports from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, however, indicate that the unemployment rate in the tech sector stands at approximately 2.2%, which is significantly lower than the national average across all industries. How about hospitality and tourism? Pre-pandemic, early 2000s, the unemployment rate was approximately 5%. In mid-2022, the unemployment level rose to approximately 15%. And as of mid-2024, the unemployment rate decreased slightly to around 12%, but remains higher due to ongoing recovering challenges in global travel and tourism. What about retail? Pre-pandemic, early 2020, the unemployment rate was around 6%. In mid-2022, the unemployment rate was around 7%. Today, the unemployment rate fluctuated, currently sitting around 8%, influenced by shifts towards e-commerce and challenging consumer behavior. How about manufacturing? The unemployment rate for manufacturing workers was approximately 3.1% pre-pandemic. As of mid-2022, the unemployment rate was approximately 5%, and today the unemployment rate slightly increased to about 6%, reflecting adjustments in automation, offshoring trends, and economic fluctuations. Energy? The unemployment rate in the energy sector pre-pandemic was around 4.6%. In mid-2022, the unemployment rate was around 8%, and as of today, the unemployment rate stays relatively stable around 8%. What's going on with construction? The unemployment rate in the construction industry was around 3.5% pre-pandemic. In mid of 2022, the unemployment rate was around 7%, and as of today, the unemployment rate sits currently around 6%, reflecting regional and project-based variations in construction activity. And lastly, to kind of round this out, let's talk about education. Pre-pandemic, the unemployment rate was about 3%. Mid-2022, the unemployment rate was about 4%. And today, the unemployment rate remains relatively stable, currently sitting around 4%, reflecting stability in educational employment despite sector-specific challenges. So, how do these all compare to the Great Recession? Let's name a few, and a few of the ones that were most impacted during. For example, during the peak of the Great Recession, construction's unemployment rate was around 27.1% in February of 2010. How about leisure and hospitality? The peak unemployment rate was around 14.8% in February of 2010. Manufacturing, the peak unemployment was around 13% as of January 2010. And retail's peak unemployment rate was around 11% as of March of 2009. So, compared to the Great Recession, some of the most affected unemployment sectors during that period are still ways off from reaching the astronomical levels that we have seen during the Great Recession as compared to today. Even compared to pre-pandemic levels, some have rose, some have gone down, but overall, In the fields that were most affected during the Great Recession, like construction, manufacturing, and retail, the unemployment rates are on the rise. So given what we know and rumors speculating, can we actually even believe the unemployment numbers that are coming out? Since the BLS is a federally run reporting agency, the BLS being the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Critics of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, such as myself, often raise concerns or skepticism about various aspects of how the data is collected, interpreted, or even presented. For example, the BLS applies seasonal adjustments to its data to account for predictable seasonal variations in employment, such as during the holiday or agricultural cycles. Arguments have been made that these adjustments can distort the true picture of unemployment trends. They argue that the methodologies used may not always accurately capture the nuances of these fluctuations. This could lead to overestimation or underestimation of employment changes in certain sectors or regions. So, given all of this, is the Fed and the federal funds rate where it's at, placing the U.S. economy on the precipice? Real arguments can be made to this regard. And just like they felt that inflation was transitory initially, they may not react in time to prevent against a recession. So now comes a grand finale to this video. What will happen to housing if the Fed holds on too long? Well, first and foremost, predatory lending practices such as subprime lending is illegal. Unlike a subprime mortgage where all you needed was a pulse to get a loan, today you need a lot more. You need to prove that you can afford the loan and that you're a reliable borrower. This is done by an income check, asset check, credit history, and even employment. So, what is a key factor in disrupting someone's ability to pay their mortgage? You guessed it, employment. But Mike, with inflation where it's been, Americans are going broke. They've been relying more and more on credit cards to pay their bills. And it's just a matter of time before your average American can't afford to make their payments. This is true, undeniable. But I implore you to see the video in the upper right-hand corner to see where it all stands today, especially pertaining to a rise in foreclosures. You will also want to know about what banks can do to you if they collapse in droves, like in 2008. No more bailouts. So please watch that video to follow more of the current trends that are happening. Okay, Mike, recently I've been hearing about ARM loans becoming a problem for Americans in home ownership. That should create a crash. While the stories are semi-relevant, let's make a comparison between today and the Great Recession in that factor. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and other sources, ARMs accounted for approximately 5 to 7% of all outstanding mortgages in the United States today. This percentage has generally been lower compared to fixed-rate mortgages, which are more common among American homeowners. But during the height preceding the Great Recession, the height of the housing bubble, ARMs were estimated to consist of roughly 30 to 40% of all new mortgage originations in the United States. Really big difference, isn't it? Now, while 5 to 7% is no drop in the bucket, the question is, how many of those ARMs will not choose to refinance either later down the road or currently to avoid foreclosure? Guess it really kind of depends on where they are in their loan. And are they still employed? So in summary, and giving historical breakdowns along with all the relevant data, are we near another Great Recession? Should we expect home prices to crash? Well, unless the Fed tips the scale too much by holding the federal funds rate for too long, unemployment shouldn't rise and businesses can afford to get back to business. Granted, they start making their cuts sooner than later. If not, more Americans will lose their jobs. However, this time too, most Americans have equity in their homes, unlike being underwater from the get-go like in 2008. This suggests that your average American will not be down and out like they were during the Great Recession. And another key important factor to consider here is that there's no longer financial greed through subprime loans and fraudulent rated mortgages. If the effects of recession come to light, this will be laid entirely at the feet of the Fed. However, should we expect another '08 where we saw home prices come tumbling down due to astronomical unemployment rates and foreclosures? I'm not assuming so we'll just have to wait and see. But have prices come down, especially here in the Treasure Valley? Yes, they have. Instead of calling it a crash, I call it a correction because the pandemic really made some swings that we were not expecting, especially in the astronomical gains that we made in equity, especially right here in the greater Boise, Idaho area. Rising at 53.7% in 2 years was astronomical, and we just know that it was a matter of time before prices started going the other direction. Regardless though, and one thing is for certain, I still have a very hard time believing that the data that the BLS reports is correct. I guess only after the election will the true numbers come to light. Well, as always, thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I know some of these videos can get incredibly long, but I do hope that they are informational. And of course, if you have any further questions or you are looking to buy, sell, or invest right here in the greater Boise, Idaho area, better known as the Treasure Valley, please feel free to reach out to me. You can notice my contact information below. If you're looking to make a move in from out of state, please also click in the description below. Download my free relocation guide so that way you are in the know before you decide to make the move. Also, if you're kind of taking a look at this and you're just like, oh man, I want to sell maybe before this all starts crumbling down, of course that decision's up to you. You can also get a free home evaluation by clicking in the description below, clicking on the link, and obtaining it via my website. Of course, I'll probably end up giving you a call, but no worries, I am a no pressure individual, but it's a good way to know what your house may be worth in today's economy. But other than that, if you did enjoy this content and you want to stick around for more that I come up with, please hit the subscribe button below, hit the notification bell so that you're constantly in tune with the videos that I do come up with. Also, please give me a comment below. I would really love to hear your thoughts about what you think is going to be happening coming up in the future. And if you really enjoyed this information and you feel somebody can benefit from it, please feel free to share it. And also give me a thumbs up. It helps out with the algorithm and it helps out this channel immensely. So again, thank you very much, everybody. God bless. I look forward to the day that we speak, and I look forward to calling you my neighbor.